Welcome to a new edition of Sermons for Snowbirds. Today I have a special helper. My son, Akiva Meir, is helping videotape this particular session.
Hi.
And it's really nice to have him here with us. In any case, I want to look at the concept of nisayon, of a trial or a test. It's actually one of the more fascinating concepts that the Tanakh, that the Hebrew Bible introduces. You know, Eric Auerbach, in his famous essay, Odysseus' Scar, the first chapter of his book, Mimesis, Eric Auerbach famously contrasts the difference between classical Greek literature and the Tanakh. And he says that in the Tanakh, there is the possibility of change and transformation, that characters can actually develop. And one of the great vehicles of character development is the nisayon, is the trial or the test, in which someone is tested and then all of a sudden, not only do they prove their character, very often they improve their character. They become better people. And of course, the most famous nisayon, the most famous trial, is the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, where Abraham is asked to sacrifice his son Isaac. And there the word nisa, which means to test, is used. But there are multiple trials that are found in the Tanakh. And the idea of a trial being there, a crisis being there to test your character, is a very powerful one. It allows us even to frame and reframe the way that we see the world around us. I mean, I'm thinking even of the way Winston Churchill, the way he would talk to Britain, members of the people of Britain during World War II, and in particular after the terrible defeat at Dunkirk, where the British people essentially believed that the next step was that Hitler would invade the British Isles and take over England. And of course, he tells the British people that this will be looked back upon as their finest hour. That's in many ways the concept of a nisayon, recognizing in the moment that this crisis actually has to be framed as a trial and will actually show what type of character we have, and maybe even transform our character and make us into better people. But in parashat Beshalach, there's a nisayon, there's a test that seems very strange. We're told that the Jews are complaining a month after leaving Egypt, that they don't have any food. So God says, fine, I'm going to rain upon you bread from heaven. And then God says that this particular gift, which we know it as manna, this gift is going to be a test. In fact, God says, "L'man anasenu hayelech b'torati imlo." I'm going to test whether or not you are going to follow my teachings. And of course, every commentary wants to know the answer to the same question. What precisely is the test of the manna? God gives you food from heaven. You don't have to worry about where you're going to get your food. And that's a test? A free lunch is a test? So the Ramban, giving an answer that perhaps is the closest to pshat, closest to the simple reading of the text, the Ramban says the test wasn't so much receiving the manna. The test was following God into the desert to receive the manna. The idea that people are willing to follow God, go into a desert where there are no other possibilities of finding food, go into a desert where every day you use up your supplies and have to wait for another gift from heaven to fall down and feed you. That, the Ramban says, that's a test. It's not the manna that's the test. It's not the wealth, the food, the free lunch. It's following God into the desert and depending on the manna that is the test. And this is, of course, a very, very beautiful explanation, and I think it's probably closest to the simple reading of the text. And in many ways, it represents the Jewish experience throughout the generations. Jews have, in a sense, followed God into the desert. And as we followed God into the desert, we've shown our loyalty. Yes, there have been those that have assimilated along the way, and indeed, had Jews remained fully loyal to their faith, there'd be many more Jews today. But what is remarkable is how many did not assimilate, and how low the rates of assimilation were throughout the generations. And yet there were persecution after persecution. You can go and just recite a list. Going to Europe, the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Cossack massacres, pogroms, blood libels. And then, of course, there was just day-to-day anti-Semitism, in which so many different people experience prejudice, experience discrimination on a daily basis. And yet the Jews followed God into the desert. The test of difficulty, the Jews were able to pass. But then there's another explanation of what the Nisayon, what the test of the manna was. And this is an explanation given by Chizkuni in the Sforno. And this explanation is a brilliant explanation. The Chizkuni and the Sforno both say the test of the manna was a test of plenty. The question was, how would the Jews respond to having everything given to them on a silver platter? Difficulty is certainly a test, but your character can also be tested in times of plenty, in times of wealth. And indeed, even in general society, we recognize that even though we have so much, even though we have advanced in terms of technology and we have grown in terms of economy in the past 50 or 60 years, people are not necessarily any happier. And as Greg Easterbrook in his famous book, the Progress Paradox, notes, is that with everything extra that we've had in the past 50 or 60 years, we're still not happier. And that's because it's very difficult to pass the test of plenty. But for Jews in particular, this has been a very difficult test to pass. If you just look at the way our community is responding to an era in North America where there is no discrimination, or virtually no discrimination, virtually no anti-Semitism, and our community has succeeded remarkably on a socioeconomic scale. And yet what has happened with all of this success is that we have assimilated on a greater scale than we ever did, than any generation before us. And I think that this is precisely the point, this is precisely the lesson. Sforno is telling us that wealth and plenty and the ability to have whatever you want is also a test of character. And unfortunately, it can transform your character for the better, but it can also transform your character for the worse. Jews throughout the generations have passed the test of walking through the desert. Now we have the test of plenty and wealth. And the question is, can we pass that test?